Financial freedom is in your hands. With CMC Markets' revolutionary new iPad app, you can trade CFDs wherever you are with the leverage you choose. Download now and trade your way. At CMC Markets, your thought counts.
In Australia, we've been told you can't make goods here. But my guest today, Michael Crouch, shows that's simply not right. He makes hot water heaters for companies, for offices, that boiling water we use to make our teas and our coffees. He pioneered that in this country. And as manufacturing of all sorts of things moved to China and Malaysia and all sorts of other countries, he looked hard at taking his manufacturing out of Sydney into those countries. And the conclusion was no. Because if I did that, I'd have to take my research there. I'd have to duplicate my engineering. And he found it didn't make sense. Now, when the Australian dollar was around 60 or 70 US cents, it was absolutely a fabulous decision. Now it's tougher, of course. But what he does is to import components. Moreover, the amazing thing about Zip and these office hot water systems is that the giants around the world never went into this market. And so he exports to something like 50 countries. The machines are at number 10 Downing Street and all made here in Australia. So let me introduce you to Michael Crouch, a 77-year-old entrepreneur who's still got the fire in his belly. Michael, you've got a unique position in the hot water market as you put your installations into offices and things like that. How did you get into that business?
We had to, I'd found out through years, I guess, of the hard way. You always find out things the hard way. But there was not much future in being a Me Too manufacturer. And I had to look for a product or think of a product that nobody else was making. And that was pretty hard. But as far as Australia was concerned, and we were just in Australia at that time, I thought, well, if everybody's having hot water, why shouldn't boiling water be automatic? I mean, you walk into an office, if you remember the days, and somebody would say, you have a cup of tea, and by the time the tea arrived, you were hoping that it wouldn't arrive because you'd finished your appointment.
That's right,
you know?
yes.
And
it was lukewarm.
Yes, and so otherwise there was the days of the tea lady and things like that. But to be able to, in the morning, if you got to work, the urn was always cold. So why not have automatic boiling water? I mean, if hot water came out of a tap, cold water came out of a tap, why not boiling water out of a tap?
But you'd think that those big giants who are making your hot water services in homes and big installations like that, you'd think they wouldn't let you in. They'd say,
well, you might think that, but then, you know, if you're small, you make out, you know, they don't worry. They just think you're have a idiosyncrasy or something like that with your products, you know. And we still tried and made out we were selling hot water, but it was the boiling water market we kept on growing. And I think my biggest joy was being in 1987 and being in United Kingdom and then going to the electrical exhibitions over in Germany and finding out that nobody had the sort of heater that we'd made.
So you took it to London?
We took it to London in 1987, started selling there in 1988 through a distributor. They sacked us in 1991 because they thought that they would make theirs and copy ours. Yes, it wasn't very nice.
And what happened?
Well, I said, you know, our agreement is says that you'd never do that. And they said, yes, but we think that isn't very legal and you can't expect us to abide by a clause in an agreement that mightn't be legal.
So they're still making them now?
They're still making them, but they've got no passion in the organisation to improve the model. So they copied us for a while, but we've moved ahead, they haven't.
Okay. Now, how do you market this product? How do you get this product into the offices?
You've just got to go and tell people about it.
But travelling salesman?
So you have a sales team. We have a very large, extensive sales team operating in each state. I think that the greatest joy was again in the 80s, mid-80s I expect, and we said then that if we had a map of Sydney, it still hangs in our boardroom, we put dots on the buildings where we'd sold them in. And we then said, well, if we can do that in Sydney, we can do it in other states. If we can do it in other states, we can do it in other cities. We can do perhaps other cities around the world.
So how many countries do you market to?
Well, to my horror, the other day, I was told by our export department that we're now in 54 countries. And I said, oh, come on, I don't believe that for a moment. And so the next thing came through a list of projects in 54 countries where we're actually in. The projects were all nominated.
Now you've got some royal patronage too.
And we've got some royal patronage too,
But
yes.
the Queen uses your machine?
I don't think she makes her own tea, strange to say. It's a shame, isn't it? It's funny, because we are, we're in number 10 Downing Street. I've been there. And President Mandela, he has 4 in his house.
Is he really?
Yeah. And Dr. Lee Kuan Yew, and the family there, or parliamentary officers in Singapore.
Now you still make this product in Australia.
Yes.
Why do you do that when just about every other product of this sort, like in terms of the magnitude of scale, is now being made offshore? Why do you make it here?
Because Australia, strange to say, is a very good manufacturing base. Now, I know that our exchange in the last couple of years hasn't quite been the way we'd want it, but particularly when we were sitting at around about 40p to the British pound sterling, when the currencies were at that level, only 2 or 3 years ago, we were a marvellous base. If we went offshore, you've got to have your engineering team offshore. You might go to Malaysia, you might go to China. We look very seriously at both. But you've got to send your engineering team offshore, or you employ additional engineers over there. Your research and development, where do you want to have that? Is that going to be here? How do you test it? How do you get it into your production lines? So you're really going to start duplicating your R&D. When we took in the amount of the non-directs that we'd have to employ to manufacture overseas and have our main market here or in Europe, it just was not economical.
How do you get on with a Australian dollar around about 90 cents or above? Is it economic still at that level?
Yes, well, there's we bring in a lot of componentry from overseas, from a number of countries. We do have suppliers in China, so it's far better to bring in componentry from overseas and have your assembly operation here.
How much do you? What sort of
we
level
fabricate here and we assemble here.
What sort of level of research do you spend? You've mentioned this several times that you've got to keep updating your product.
Well,
Is it substantial?
we do. We have a good many people, double figures in research and development.
Okay.
So without counting them up, it's got to be at least a dozen. Yes, we're constantly thinking of tomorrow.
All the time.
Yes.
And roughly how big is the manufacturing business? How many people do you employ in rough terms?
We've got a few hundred
okay.
here now, yes.
So it's a substantial business, isn't it?
It's a substantial business. Troy, we prided ourselves, the biggest worry was, now I've left the print media.
Yes.
Right, and you're online.
Exactly.
And when the web browser came in and we suddenly thought, how are we going to preserve our brand name? Why isn't somebody going to be able to undercut us and things like that? But we have a brand. We're very proud of our brand. We do strange things with it. We're principal sponsor of the Sydney Festival this year. That gives us a big kick to do something for the community. We were the principal sponsors for the Duke of Edinburgh Award. Now that trains youth of Australia. We love doing things like that as a company. But I think the big thing is that if you have a brand, you've got to have a service organisation. We have an extensive service organisation, and where we don't have our own trained people, that's perhaps outside capital cities, we have guys going around training contractors and plumbers in every town across Australia. There will be a trained person that can service our products.
So you back up your manufacturing with your service?
Yes, and that's a huge plus. So if somebody wants to bring in a cheap look-alike from overseas, let them do it. But who's going to service it? who's going to be out there in the marketplace looking after it? Who's going to put the warranty on?
Now, you've been in this business and similar businesses most of your life. And I guess in the 70s.
Yes.
What are you going to do? What's the succession? Do you have a succession plan?
My son is in the business.
Okay.
We have a very good key staff. I mean, been in business 40 years, and in 40 years you build up a team of people. We lost one the other day at the age of 54. He suddenly died. You know, life can be very short. He'd been with us over 30 years. He was our chief training officer, actually. He'd travelled the world for us, training people in all those markets in which we sell. Because we won't sell into a market.
But have you thought of floating the company?
Yes.
Bringing in public shareholdings?
We have. That just is going to diverse our... It's much easier to look after a small number of shareholders than a big number of shareholders.
So you haven't had to. You haven't required the capital to do that.
No, we're quite proud of the fact we've always expanded out of our own resources, and that of the bank as well, of course, in the early years. Yes.
So you're confident that the Crouch family will continue on to the next generation?
That's my son's choice.
Yes.
That's my son's choice. But because we have...
What do you think he'll do?
Oh, I'll stay. I get so much satisfaction, and the company allows me to do a lot of things in the community. And our company is a very community-minded company.
What if he said to your dad, "I'd like to sell"? What would you say?
Well, I've got to do what's in the interests of the people that run the company,
Right.
and that is terribly important. It's their interests that's absolutely paramount. And because they are the company, people are the company, and you've always got to act in terms of your people's best interests. I think that's the first thing that's got to be considered. But as far as my son's concerned, I've always said to him and to his sisters that he has to be free to lead the life that he wants to lead. For the present, I know he's very happy in Zip.
Thank you very much.